this diagram on the board looks like I'm going to do a teaching, but I'm not. I'm just a visual person, and I like to see things in relationship with each other visually. So, look, I was going to share a lot about the inside of the triangle, the abiding place. But there are so many of us over the course of the school who have shared on the abiding. That place of abiding, that's the place under the wings of the cherubim. That's the place of the presence of God. That's the place of being in the way. That's the place that God has been drawing us to all throughout this school. And we hear testimonies of when we're in that place, God does something in us. You've no idea how close I was to just throwing this teaching away, because Helen talked about the love down here at the bottom, and Evelyn and Donna talked about different aspects of being in that place of that abiding place of fellowship with God. And I thought, what am I going to say? But I realised, when God has said something to us, we should listen. When he says it a second time, it's pretty serious. But when he keeps saying it over and over and over again, watch out, because God is going to do something. Now, this morning in worship, I felt overwhelmed by the presence of God. Even though I was behind the camera, I couldn't do very much, but I felt like the floodgates were just about to open. And then Nick said something about the floodgates opening. And I also had the sense that, in worship, we get used to, okay, well, that's 20 minutes, that's up. That's the end of worship. No. I believe God is saying to us, in this place of abiding, learn to live here. Learn to stay here. Learn that when your 20 minutes of worship is up, you are still in the presence of God. Keep worshipping. Keep worshipping. Keep worshipping. Anthony and I are privileged to live out of town half an hour. So when I drive into town, it's not 5 minutes of talking in tongues. It's half an hour of talking in tongues. Or sometimes if there's two of us in the car, we listen to worship music all the time. But there are a few things that I just want to bring out and sort of pull it all together. So let's read 1 John 1:3. John chapter 1 verse 3. The Father Apostle John is saying in verse 3, that which we have seen and heard we declare to you. So he's saying, look, we lived with Jesus for 3 years. We heard every one of his teachings. We saw every one of his miracles. This is what we're declaring to you, so that you may have fellowship with us. And truly, our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. Some weeks ago, I started doing a study on sin, and then I followed it up doing a study on love. Now, I have 11 pages of just dot-pointed notes on love. And at the end of that, I'm just sitting talking to God and saying, oh, I need a summary of all of this. Can you just sort of bring it all together for me? And so God has started bringing it all together. One of the things that I found was the number of times that faith and love are mentioned together. I'd not realised it before. And I thought, that's a bit significant. So I did a bit of a drawing and I put that down. And then I thought, these are like, because talking about faith, I realised faith is also connected very strongly with hope. Our hope is very firmly established in the gospel. It's in the Word of God. So I'm sure that most of us have heard, that story about the anchor, where you throw the anchor overboard and the anchor has to be firmly established into something solid. You can't throw an anchor out and just let it sit in sand. And I'm thinking of the beautiful sandy beaches and bottoms of the ocean up around Mackay and the Whitsundays. The anchor won't hold there because there's nothing solid to keep the anchor embedded. It needs to be embedded in something solid. And so I then realised, hang on, there's 3 things here. Now, I'm not saying there's anything special about the number 3, and I'm not saying these are the only 3 either. This is just what God has shown me so far. But I realised there's something about these 3: faith, doctrine and love. So what am I going to call them? Because, I just like having a handle on everything. That's just the way my mind works. And it was only a couple of days ago that I realised these are anchors of the soul. Now, with every one of these 3, there's a 2-sided aspect of it. The same with the anchor. The anchor needs to be embedded in something solid, but we've actually got to throw the anchor overboard. And so with love, we receive the love of God, but we also give that love out to other people. God has firmly established the doctrine for us, but we have to walk in that doctrine. We start our salvation with faith, but there is also an obedience of faith, and that's what the literal calls it. If we look up Romans 1:5, God has given us grace and apostleship for the obedience of faith. So I haven't quite, got the whole of that yet in my spirit, but I'm sure God is working on it. So there's 2 aspects of each of those. So my encouragement to you today is that with each of these 3 anchors of the soul, it's God at work who is doing this in us. And as Evelyn so brilliantly put it, it is God's plan, it is God's purpose, it is God's work to do the work of building the church, to bring salvation. It is God's work through faith, doctrine and love to keep us in that place of abiding with Him. So my encouragement to you is you don't have to grit your teeth and go, I'm going to worship for 25 minutes. As we stay in that place with God, that abiding place, we will want to worship for that long. We will want to stay in the Word of God. We will want to walk by faith because it's God doing that work within us. So, bless you all. And let's continue in the abiding.